Okay, it is 4:04. Excuse me, on August 15th. This is the meeting of the City of Tallahassee Ethics Board. Call the meeting to order. We have a quorum. We have one member who is delayed for a few minutes, but we will go ahead and start moving through some of the non-critical elements of the agenda. First thing on the agenda is the minutes from the last meeting. Does anybody have any corrections, additions, or edits to the minutes?
Approval of the minutes.
Ms. Phillips moves approval, and Mr. Davis seconds. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign, and the minutes are approved. The next item on the agenda is the Ethics Officer Report, and we'll do this as we usually do in a page at a time so that people can ask questions and make comments. The first page is the summary of the month, the activities for the month. Ms. Meadows-Keefe.
I have done things this month, such as finalize the ethics handbook, and you all should have a draft. Now, this is a prototype only of the brochure design. So Ms. Atkins has been faithfully working on formatting that into a brochure format to keep our costs low. And then I have a PDF that's hopefully, as we speak, going to be posted to the web. That will be available online. And then I attended various meetings, and then I did provide ethics education to the COCA, that's the Council for Culture and Arts Advisory Committee this month. And then the usual activities. So if anyone has questions, I'm happy to speak about any of those.
I think this is an appropriate time. I would add one thing. You and I talk on a regular basis about,
Yes.
about a variety of issues, and you forwarded to me the recently published audit of Cascades Holding, the Edisons. Mm-hmm. Cascades Holdings, the Edison. Put the S in the right place. If I could I get you to forward that to all of the members just for their information, since that seems to be a name that pops up from time to time. It's a good audit, finds a number of relatively technical deficiencies, and everybody should know that obviously any audit of by the city auditor of the Edison, he can only look at those things that are within the city's contract. So for instance, he can't go and demand to see the books of the private vendor. That's not within what the city contract allows, but he did look at everything that he could legally get to. So it's an informative audit, and I think it will be helpful for members to know about.
Okay, so that's on my list of things to do, and hopefully I can remember to do that today after we're all done. So that would conclude my report.
Any questions on that? The next thing would be the, excuse me, hotline.
We had only one hotline call this month, and you'll see there what that was about. And there was some email exchanges going on with different employees, and these emails were made available through a public records request, and a citizen reviewed those emails and believed that some language could be interpreted in it as racist language.
Okay.
There were no racial slurs used at all. It was basically, it seemed like frustration and an email that probably should have sat in draft form overnight.
And then been deleted before it was sent.
And then probably deleted before being sent. But I did speak to the employee about it and cautioned the employee about the importance of using appropriate professionalism when transmitting emails, and reminding them that all of those can be subject to public records requests. So I did not see a violation of the city ethics code, therefore I've recommended that the matter be closed.
And that's 112?
That is, well, it's 113.
Oh, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
113. I have an old list here. Does anybody have a problem with closing that one? I think the remainder of these, we're going into a closed session in a little while, and we'll have a chance to talk a little more candidly about some other issues. Okay. The next item is our monthly update on the budget. Anything unusual this month?
I don't believe there was anything unusual this month. We are continuing to use some legal services for various opinions and for our closed session. And I did meet with Mr. Currington on Monday to get ready for this meeting.
Okay. Any questions, Ms. Meadowskeef? No? Okay, that would move us to the ethics moment, and you're going to talk to us about the City of Atlanta. So sorry Mr. Smith isn't here.
I know, I wanted him to be present for this, but this is, again, and the reason I brought this one up is because we've talked a lot about seats and seating and tickets to different events, and we had talked about it in the city of Chicago, et cetera. And here we've got the city of Atlanta that has this great Mercedes stadium. And the ethics board there had ruled, going back to 1997, I believe, that tickets were not to be given out as perks, that if you went, you had to serve in an official capacity. And we've talked before what an official capacity is, that you're going to welcome people or you're going to be recognized. Official capacity isn't just occupying a seat. But now they have an economic development entity in Atlanta that wants an exception to that. Because when people come from out of town to see about potentially doing business or moving their company to Atlanta, they want to be able to take those folks to the Mercedes Stadium for events to basically market Atlanta. So they are asking the ethics board to reconsider that. So the ethics board's actually going to reconvene in September. I think they punted on deciding it this time, but they are going to decide that in September. So tickets just continue to be an issue. And then also part of this was whether there was jurisdiction over this Economic Development Council by the board, since it's an independent organization. So that was the teaching moment there.
Okay, I thought it was interesting on page 3 of the opinion from the board. It says that the question about one of the questions applies to a situation where the agreement with a third party clearly violates the Atlanta Code of Ethics. They seem to kind of stake out some territory there, I think, pretty clearly. And I would note, again, for the board members, that in terms of our jurisdiction, one of the things we've asked the commission to consider is gifts and,
right.
and misuse of gifts to city employees or city officials, with some guidance to us on the ability to distinguish between, giving the electrical lineman who's out, working in ridiculous weather, being able to take him a cup of hot coffee, being okay, and the other extreme that gifts might go to at the other end, where you fly to Wyoming for a hunting trip.
Correct.
So at any rate, this is more along the lines of problems with gifts, and of course in Tallahassee we have stadiums of our own that at certain points of the year seats are
Hot
popular.
tickets.
Yeah.
Right.
So thank you. The next would be public comment on agenda items. I have 2 cards. Mr. Jackson, you didn't say what agenda item, but
I'm certainly just going to cover whatever you want. It's ethics, lack of ethics.
well, why don't I just recognize you at this point if you come to the microphone, please, sir?
Okay.
And
And is this the 3-minute,
No, sir, we're not going to impose a 3-minute rule on you, but I would point out that we do have a couple complaints that we have to consider in a non-public meeting, so
I can probably do it in 3 minutes, but I will say this, I think I'm going to start, and this is, should be well received by you, that I'm going to start coming and joining you at the Ethics Commission meeting. I want to share some new news, in case you haven't seen it. Front page of the USA Today, okay, FBI agents went undercover in Florida's capital city for the biggest investigation in years. City of Tallahassee has been already branded the capital of pay-to-play. I looked, and just one sentence out of that. They described it as a massive, multi-year investigation of local politicians, their friends, and millions of dollars in taxpayer money. In conclusion, they say, in the crosshairs may be some of Florida's most ambitious political climbers, including its mayor, who has his sights on being governor. Okay, good news.
if I can interrupt you for 1 second, I know I got a copy of that article. Ms. Meadows, Keith, would you make sure that everybody gets the email of the link to that article? Because it's a well-written piece, I think.
And it shows the problem that we face, and that's why I spent, since 2009, I've been talking about the corruption in Tallahassee. People's looked down, don't listen to Jackson. He's crazy. He's got too much money and too much free time on his hands. The FBI doesn't agree with that. The FBI is going to come down and they're going to change things. Here's a problem with this ethics commission. And, I'm just share. We don't have much time. Okay, there's the biggest problem with this page. It says the number of public calls in a month is 1, and it's about someone having a potty mouth. Okay, I didn't work that hard and give you so much of my money, and these folks worked extremely hard to get a position for you. We want you to represent us. Now, the city took over the ethics policy because the city attorney wrote it, and then he hired Julie, who's a nice person. She's the wrong person for the job. This body is not independent of anybody. You're controlled by the city and the city attorney. What I'm going to propose to you folks is that you take back the control. You can take the policy I had written by 3 very good attorneys. You can add and change. Make sure that you're going to address the mayor on down is who you're supposed to look at. I'm not worried about the potty mouth on the second floor. I'm concerned about the mayor, the commissioners, the city attorney, the city manager, the top 7 or 8, 10 people and their dealings. What this body should do, write your own policy, say who you're going to be directing that to. Here are the penalties, and this is what we feel that we want, and I'll be glad to pay you legal fees if we have some folks to help you out. No, I guess we can use city money. You got $500,000 here. Have an ethics policy that you each want. And then you don't go begging on your hands and knees, please respond to my letter, commissioners. No, you say this is our policy. This is written by us to represent the public. And then you give it to the commission and you say you have 2 weeks to pass this. And if not, the next day after the 2 weeks, everyone turns in a resignation. You're participating in a fraud, in my humble opinion, with the city commission. Your hands are tied. You can't even look at a city commissioner. That's where the problems are. And I'm not just telling you these things I don't know about. Remember years ago in 2009, I came here and I talked about Harold Knowles. And that's where John Marks and Harold Knowles were business partners. John Marks is advertising. You want to work with the city? Go to my law firm. And right here, his qualifications is he happens to be the mayor of Tallahassee. He's advertising for business when he's a mayor of Tallahassee. Harold Knowles got the first crooked deal from John Marks when John Marks paid Harold Knowles' company $1 million to put up a fence. Now, how many attorneys, we got an attorney down there, how chain link fences have you put up recently? That's usually not the role of an attorney. Okay, that one. We have other things. People are looking the other way. I like Nancy Miller. Hell, I like John Marks. I like Scott Maddox. He's an okay guy. The problem is they're acting not only unethical, extremely when it comes to, and we'll see exactly where the criminality is. Harold Node's been indicted, income tax evasion, bribery. That's what he was doing here in Tallahassee for the last 9 years. Nancy Miller. Okay, she goes ahead and her husband, she never disclosed her husband was here working with the city, signs a purchase order for his brother for $420,000. Isn't there something wrong with that? I mean, if it's not, and maybe the policy you guys are working with, there's nothing you can do about it. Okay, change the city ordinance. Take the power. You have the power. I only have 3 minutes to share this. I appreciate the couple extra, but you've got the power. You've got the authority. If everyone up here resigns, people will say, damn, there is a problem here. If I'm up here talking, they're beginning to understand there's a problem. Nancy Miller gives a job to her son. Let's have a policy where you can't have, only one employee out of the family should be getting a job with the city, okay? You go from Nancy, Rick Fernandez, and I guess you're going to talk about that. Okay, he receives a $4,700 owner's discount. He makes life decisions on that business. When you can stay open, when you have to close, a number of issues. How much you're paying for rent, $4,700. And Julie says she didn't think it's an ethical problem. Of course it is. If I give each of you $1,000, and ask you for a little favor, is that unethical? Just like this, what's the difference with this $5,000? $4,700. When you look on this, and what was so disappointing, Rick Fernandez, right after he takes the $4,700, he turns around and in an unadvertised position hires the guy who gave him the $4,700. Doesn't that just kind of, I'm a PhD psychologist. I'm not a investigator. I'm not an attorney. I'm not a cop. But I say, damn, hiring a guy that just gave me $4,700 just has to be wrong. If not, rewrite the ethics policy and make it wrong. Our ethics officer, I think she's very pleasant. But she's walking around. She was hired by the city attorney, and she's being paid way too much money. I'm a taxpayer. She's paying way too much money for what she does. She told you what she did. Okay? The most important part of her job is not putting together more brochures that people aren't going to read. The most important job for her, which she's failing at, is she had one person in a month. Yes, come in and talk to her. The reason no one comes to you, folks, is no one trusts you. No one believes you're going to do anything. Yesterday, and you'll be reading about it in short order, I had 3 people contact me because they trust me. They feel certain I'm not bought and paid for by John Marks or Scott Maddox, and it's criminal. The information I got is criminal, and it's gone directly to the FBI. For someone to say, I only had one person out of 3,200 people thought there might be something unethical going on, when an FBI agent told me he spent 25 years doing undercover work. He flies around town, the country, and he'll set up a scam like we're going through right now. Mr. Jackson, in 25 years, Tallahassee's a small little town. But he said, I have never seen in a small town the amount of corruption that exists in Tallahassee. And we have an ethics commission that sits here, and you're willing to go along with our city commission because they won't let you do an investigation? Don't play the game. The last thing, Julie did write a nice 50-page something here about the story, about the ethics, and they talk about the Stetson Law Review. And if you turn to page 595, and happen to have it here, she writes about one particular vocal citizen who was unsuccessful running for city commission. I wanted to run for city commission to expose the corruption. Is highly critical of the mayor, and goes on and said he's filed multiple complaints and they've never found anything. That's not correct. What we found back in 2009 was we killed the biomass plant. And we found that T.K. Weatherall's wife was going to be given a 10% interest in that. And Alan Katz, respected attorney, was already getting checks from them while he sat up there at the city commission was voting for this. We found the mayor misusing her credit cards. We found deferred comp. Yeah, the ethics commission said we couldn't deal with it. You know why? Because the ethics commission only deals with cash, salary. If you say deferred comp, nothing in their ethics policy says anything about deferred comp. So that's why they threw it out. Not that there was any legal reason for him to take it. The ethics commission just simply couldn't rule. I thought ADE, a year later, had the documentation. John Marks, ADE, he's getting paid $25,000 a year from a federal contract. Honeywell, when I went to the Ethics Commission, the reason I take people to the Ethics Commission and the Elections Commission, I got a couple more for the Ethics Commission, once you get a politician under oath, you got a 50-50 chance of having to tell you the truth. That's why. And what did we learn? I learned that John Marks, the mayor of our town, was getting paid $150,000 a year after he gave Honeywell a $32 million non-bid contract. Okay, what does our policy say about no-bid contracts? We shouldn't have a no-bid contract. Definitely when it gets around whatever you want to number, $32 million is too high. Was there anything that he did was wrong or unethical? No. As long as you funnel the $150,000 through Honeywell's law firm, you can give him all the money you want. The only reason that stopped is when I got up here and said, stop taking the money, help us. That's Honeywell. The Rick Fernandez thing, it's crazy. Don't talk to the commissioners. Write your ethics policy, make it strong, put teeth in it, have penalties, and yes, if you walk around like Scott and you say, oh, I don't know where that $131,000 went, well, there's penalties if you can't keep track of money. So I appreciate it. I would stick around, but I'm going to come back and we'll chat again. I'm available to speak with any of you. I have documentation I've been sharing with the FBI. I'll be glad to share it with you. You will be amazed at the corruption. And you're in charge of this ethics commission, and in, what, a year and a half, 2 years, you haven't found anybody guilty of doing anything? And we've got major criminal problems that's being examined and exposed right now. I hope it's only one person with shutters. I hope you open up your eyes, take the control that you have, and write up a policy, stand firm, have the backbone to say, Mr. Mayor, we're not playing this game anymore. Scott, it's a new day, young man. Here's the rules. We're going to make them. And if you don't want them, then fine, we're all leaving. And I'm leaving too. Thank you, sir. I really appreciate the time. There's no reason for me to stay here. There's nothing on this sheet that's worth dealing with.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, sir. Mr. Wilcox, you're up next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the board. I'm Ben Wilcox with Citizens for Ethics Reform, and I do share Mr. Jackson's concern about this story that I guess is going to come out tomorrow in USA Today on the front page all over the country. And, you know, I got to say that, you know, Citizens for Ethics Reform, when we proposed the charter amendment and worked to get it passed, you know, we didn't talk about corruption being a problem in Tallahassee. All we talked about was trying to get ahead of corruption, so we didn't see problems like we've seen in Palm Beach County and other areas of the state. And that was really the purpose for the creation of this ethics board and the creation of an independent ethics officer. And so it's disappointing to me that there is a story that's going to come out nationally that portrays Tallahassee as being corrupt. So we'll see, you know, what the results of the criminal investigation are. But again, you know, you are supposed to be being a watchdog to make sure that we don't get to this point. I want to thank the board for your efforts to strengthen the city's ethics code. I do think, you know, you could consider making it even stronger, but I will let you know that we're meeting with members of the City Commission. We've met with Commissioner Ziffer, and we will be asking for meetings with other members of the Commission to support your efforts. Also want to let you know we appreciate you going into your executive session later in this meeting to look at the two complaints that are on the agenda there, and would also in one of the complaints, the ethics officer mentions that they're asking it to be referred to the Florida Commission on Ethics. I would just urge you to consider that option for all ethics complaints. I think you know, if a citizen takes the trouble to file an ethics complaint, first of all, there should be an investigation of that complaint. Don't, you know, try to hide behind the fact that you don't think you have jurisdiction, and investigate the complaint and then decide what options, you know, you have, whether you have jurisdiction or whether you want to refer it to the Florida Commission on Ethics or the other 4 sources or resources of referrals to the Commission on Ethics, which include the Governor's Office, State Attorney, United States Attorney, and FDLE. Either one of those entities can refer an anonymous complaint to the Florida Commission on Ethics. So look forward to hearing the results of your executive session. But also want to make the point that it's kind of redundant. I made this point in your last meeting, but again, looking at Julie's ethics officer report, there's no mention of an ethics investigation. I mean, talks about researching, you know, material for the executive session, but there's no mention of an investigation. And I think if you go back and read the charter amendment, the language says the commission has the authority, or the board has the authority, to investigate complaints and to levy civil penalties. So, I mean, it may just be semantics, you know, research or investigation. But I think to the people who voted for this charter amendment and wanted to create an independent ethics board and ethics officer, I think we need to use the language that is in the charter amendment and investigate. I mean, and I think that would send a signal to the folks in the community that if they submit a complaint, it will be investigated. It's not going to be researched, or, you know, it will be investigated. So that concludes my comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Wilcox. We are on bylaws. This is Article 9A in the bylaws. This goes to hotline complaints. And Ms. Meadows-Keefe, are you the one to walk us through these changes?
I will, with some assistance from Mr. Currington, because I did work on this draft language prior to meeting with Mr. Currington on Monday. So I made some alterations to the language after that meeting Monday, which is why you've got a new draft in front of you.
Okay, so we have, this is the page that was laying at your
That's
at your desk,
correct.
and it has red for stricken language and blue underline for new language. So if
Correct.
everybody's on that newest version.
Is everybody there? Okay. So number 4, we wanted to establish a date certain from which the board would accept complaints. There has been an issue with complaints being submitted that are prior to the existence of the board and the ethics code. So this simply reflects that the complaints prior to the existence of the board will not be accepted unless there is an ongoing violation. And Florida statutes in Chapter 166 states that upon passage of a charter amendment, the governing body, the commission, must then amend the charter, and then that amendment is filed with the Secretary of State. Mr. Currington had asked me to find that information out, and now I'm working with the city to find out the date which that got filed with the Secretary of State, and so that would officially birth the existence of the board. So that date there, November 14th, 2014, may change based upon when the city gets back to me about when they got around to filing this with the Secretary of State. But this just simply says that if something happened in 2011, 2010, we're not going to go and examine those.
Ms. Meadows-Keefe, a question.
Yes.
In terms of what you report to us, I assume that if you get a complaint about something that happened prior to the existence of the ethics ordinance, prior to the existence of this board, and for which there's no recurring activity, that would still appear on your sheet, and it would be the board that would make the decision not to accept it, and that's not something you would do unilaterally. Is that the way this would work?
Absolutely. And I do want to clarify that every matter that crosses my desk, regardless of whether it's salty language utilized in an email or something more significant than that, it's all reported, it's all transparent, and the board would approve or be advised of all of that.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
It does, thank you.
Okay. Then next we have the equivalent of a statute of limitations in 5, and we got that from the State Commission on Ethics. Their statute of limitations is 5 years from the date of the alleged violation, and again, that's a reasonable period of time where someone should know there is a complaint and a violation, and the mechanics of investigating something older than that is difficult. So
I have a question for the members of the board. As I looked at this, I mean, right now, we haven't been in existence for 5 years, so it's not an issue. But say we're 20 years down the road, and somebody comes in and says, it's been 6 years since the alleged violation, but I didn't have any way to get this information. This information was not in the public. This information was actively hidden until 3 years ago. Does anybody think that there's a adjustment here to 5 years, rather than from the date of the alleged violation, 5 years from the date on which the alleged violation was discoverable, or something along those lines?
in medical malpractice law and in torts, they do have that kind of language. They qualify it as you must file it within 5 years unless there was a showing that there was some kind of active concealment, in which case the statute of limitations wouldn't apply. But the burden is on the person making the complaint to show, I think, that there was active cover-up. So, I mean, you could finesse that language, and I could work with Currington to do that if that's what the board would like.
Would the members be okay if we added that to extend this potentially date if there was an intent to obscure data or obscure the facts? Okay, if you guys would work on that, that would be great. And we're on 6.
I'm just making a note here, so
Thank you, ma'am.
remember to do that. Number 6 relates to the process that we've been doing now for the last few months, that if I get materials pertaining to complaints, and it's within more than 10 days prior to a board meeting, I am mailing those documents to board members, so we no longer have to have kind of cryptic discussions about what a complaint is about. You all will have received any documents that I have for your review to make our discussion and your evaluation of my recommendations more meaningful. And any materials provided less than 10 days prior to a board meeting will be agended for the following month. And the reason we're doing that is to give board members ample time, if there's voluminous materials, to review those. And those remain confidential.
Again, I'm going to suggest one thing that has just occurred to me. How would you guys feel about allowing the chair to waive that 10 days under extraordinary circumstances? So if something comes in that's 5 days out and it is a time-critical issue, that the chair could waive the 10-day requirement here in order to get it before the board at its next scheduled meeting. I'm seeing nods. Yeah. I would not expect that to be something that would be used very often, but it occurs to me that sooner or later there's going to be an issue that's going to come before the board where a quick resolution is critical. Okay. You're back on.
All right, we're on the second page, and it looks like in I, what we're saying is that the resolution of issues that the board does not have jurisdiction over, so say there was an issue with an employee, and that was reported to a supervisor. This is codifying in our bylaws what I already do, which is to report the outcome of anything at the board meeting following the resolution. So if a supervisor is looking at an employee and it takes 2 months, I would report to you at the very next board meeting after I receive the update. So what we're doing, and some of these is just tightening up what we've already been doing. So that's I. Okay. Number 10. We have been speaking in previous meetings, and we've been sensitive to the concerns of folks that have wanted issues to potentially be sent to the State Commission on Ethics. We've wanted a process for doing that, and I think it was at the last meeting, there was a presentation on the mechanics of referral and how this board could send a matter to a direct referral source such as the U.S. Attorney or State Attorney, and that anonymous complaint could then get forwarded. Alternatively, if this board wanted to forward a complaint to the State Commission on Ethics, that would need to be done by an individual board member, and so we wanted to give a process by which that would occur. So the board would discuss the potential forwarding of the matter, and there would be a vote on whether to forward it. And whoever is the highest ranking member in the majority would be the one who would sign off on the sworn complaint. And I would assist that board member in drafting. I probably ask Mr. Currington to review it to make sure it's complete, and then that board member would then sign under oath. And part of what that board member would do is include language that the board reviewed this matter in a closed session and the majority voted to send it, but I'm sending this in my capacity as an individual citizen because that's the appropriate way to do it. So I wanted to get that in front of you
Okay.
in 10A.
Any questions on 10? And then I apologize, I got into a null loop there for a minute. I think Ms. Phillips has a question on I.
Yeah, no, it's on 10A.
Okay.
And it's lines 39 and 40.
Okay.
I keep reading it because the commas are important. And I believe, and this may be a legal issue, I'm not sure, but the comma is misplaced after is, should be after complaint and true, I think.
Well, okay, so what we're doing is, Mr. Currington and I talked about this. If the board determines that the allegations of the complaint are legally sufficient, comma, that is, comma, whether the complaint, if true, would indicate a violation of the state ethics code. I think that's how we have it in our bylaws for our own complaints.
Alternatively, could you break that sentence into two sentences? After legally sufficient on line 39, put a period, and then say legal sufficiency means the complaint, if true, would indicate a violation of the state ethics code, and just avoid commas?
Sounds good.
Okay, so you're going to need to say that again, please?
After sufficient, put a period,
Okay. Got it.
and then put, in quotes, quote, legally sufficient, end quote, means
Okay, got it.
the complaint, if true, would indicate blah, blah, blah.
Perfect. Got it.
And I'm sorry, I have to pause to make sure I get
We're
that.
fine. Does anybody else have, Mr. Davis?
Mr. Chairman, I just have a question. I assume, and I think you've mentioned that this was discussed with Mr. Currington, and he's approved this language. I'm still trying to capture in my mind all the discussions we've had in recent months about what our authority and jurisdiction is. And I know Mr. Currington advised us on when we could perhaps be concerned about going beyond our authority, and some of the legal research he provided to us, an opinion letter. But I just wanted to make sure we're on sound ground with number 10 legally.
Mr. Currington?
I believe so, and I would rely on the charter amendment provision, section 2, and then the little i's, number V. The board has the authority to refer ethics and corruption matters to appropriate enforcement agencies. I think that gives this board the authority to make the referral. And then as Julie has said, the process for referral, we're taking into consideration how 112 contemplates the State Ethics Commission receiving complaints and who they can receive them from, like the governor or what.
Okay, I appreciate it.
Yeah, the one thing it seems to me that it's a disadvantage for the Ethics Commission to get a complaint from us is that we got the information from someone else, and it may be someone anonymous, so that they don't have any ability to really refine the nature of the complaint. They're kind of not able to speak to the complainant, because while if, for instance, I signed it, I would be the complainant from their perspective, but I might have no information other than the anonymous complaint we received, so I would be of little use to them, and it may make their ability to adjudicate the complaint more difficult, but that's sort of the nature of the beast.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments on the bylaw, proposed bylaw changes? This, again, is something we would...
I don't think I'm done, though.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is there more on this
I
particular?
think there was,
Oh, well,
on B.
but Ms. Phillips has.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I have a question about your comment and Mr. Davis's comment. So, it's been our policy to allow anonymous complaints. But after the statement, you're right, the Commission on Ethics has no ability to investigate a complaint we send to them that is anonymous.
Well, it wouldn't be anonymous, because, again, if
it
we
would-
vote, I would be, and I'm on
Right,
the
right,
prevailing
right.
side, I'm going to sign it. So the complaint is going to be by Richard Herring.
Right, okay.
But the source of the complaint
source of
is
the
still
complaint
anonymous, and
anonymous.
that's not available to the commission to know, to start by calling that person.
Right, so would would we consider not referring an anonymous, a complaint that came into us as anonymous?
I think that is something that we would have to talk about, and given the individual facts and circumstances, but having thought about this for a while, depending on what the anonymous complaint alleged, speaking for me personally, in terms of just my individual vote up or down, I can imagine there would be some situations where I would want more information. I would want Julie to do the data gathering, investigation, whatever. I would want more information before I could vote yes. There might be other times when there was enough alleged in the anonymous complaint that I would be comfortable voting yes, and there could be other times when the anonymous complaint was uncredible enough that I would vote no. I mean, to go to an absurd extreme, if somebody said, the Martians gave a gift of green cheese to a public employee, I think I would be forced to vote no in terms of referring that.
Right.
Mr. Davis.
And I was thinking the same thing in light of that question, that some complaints might be so detailed in providing documents, references to other people, circumstances, such that it would be easier for a body to investigate. They've got a body of at least solid foundational facts or information to do something with it beyond another complaint that might be so nebulous or summary in fashion that we couldn't do much with it. So I think there'd be some safeguards we could always be watching out for and exercising common sense.
Yeah, I would hope that we would always be in a situation where we would say, we have enough information to make a decision. If we don't have enough information, we're going to get more information. Or if no more information is available, then we'll vote up or down based on what we have, and we'll all go with our best judgment. But it's going to be, I think it's going to be very fact-specific. Ms. Meadows-Keefe, you're back on. Sorry, I interrupted you.
You didn't interrupt me. The final provision is that in little b, and again, this refers to the Citizens for Ethics reform suggestion that the board could refer matters to the governor, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, state attorney, or U.S. attorney for direct referral to the Commission on Ethics, and then the mechanics for the forwarding letter. So if the board voted, hey, we want to forward this to a direct referral authority, whoever is the highest ranking member voting for the majority would sign the forwarding letter.
Okay. And I would point out that only, if you go back to 10 on the previous page, this is issues which relate to violation of the state ethics code. So this does not control any of the referrals. If something comes into us that looks like it's a criminal matter, we would refer it to the state attorney. This is not limiting our ability to make other referrals to the Elections Commission or whomever. This is specific to those things that look like ethics violations that either we would like to have within our jurisdiction or that we think are within the jurisdiction of the State Commission. We good?
So these will come back in front of you with the revisions, and then they'll become final after a vote at the next meeting in September.
Then, let's see, where are we? We are on to the
It's a contract.
contract with Mr. Currington's firm.
So you'll recall several meetings back, we talked about the renewal of Mr. Currington's contract and whether we were going to renew it again for a term of 2 years. The board decided at that point that they thought a year was reasonable and that we would then do an RFP or other appropriate procurement document to see if there were others interested in doing the work. So this contract here will simply renew Mr. Currington for the remainder of this year, and we would have that capacity to go out for bids after that. So it's July. It become effective.
And this is this contract is good through September 30, 2018, so just slightly over a year. And
Right.
then, so somewhere in probably July of 2000, less than a year from now, we would start the bidding process and make Mr. Currington do some real work to prove his mettle. Are the board members okay? This is, I guess I will sign this.
Yes, you will.
And I
Mr.
move
Currington.
that we move forward with this contract with Mr. Currington's law firm.
Okay, Ms. Phillips moves, Mr. Davis second, or Ms. McNeil. I've got to learn to notice the wave down there. Ms. McNeil seconds. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. Okay, we will move forward with that. I'm going to go ahead and, before we go into executive session, I'm going to go through the remainder of the items so that nobody feels that they're missing anything. We have, item 9 on the agenda is board discussion concerning any items you would like added to future agendas. Ms. McKee.
I just want to remind board members that at the next meeting, there'll be my evaluation process. And the way that was conducted last year is, I think each of you received a form to fill out, and then they were brought to the meeting, and I think during the break, you tallied up all the scores and discussed.
Yeah, in an ideal world, I'd really like to get those from you guys a few days before the meeting, because it was awkward to chair the meeting and try to add
Do
up
that.
scores. So maybe we could do that by mail and let people send in their
Perfect.
evaluations. They could just send their evaluations directly to me. They don't even have to go through your hands.
Okay, or they could send them in a sealed envelope marked confidential, and
That's
then you can come fetch them whenever you'd like. The next thing that I want to just make sure y'all know about is that we are going to have a discussion of a policy change with purchasing and approval of invoices that we've been investigating. I'm going to change my nomenclature, working hard investigating and making some revisions to policies that we're going to talk about next month. So you can count on that. And if there's anything else anyone would like, and then the bylaws.
Ms. Phillips.
I know.
I think it was in September, but I'm not sure. Mr. Fletcher or Julie can help us remind me when the next audit on the CRA or the CDBG, you should be getting information back from them, a response, or finalizing your audit, or...
I see him running to the front.
I'll recognize the city auditor, and I'll talk till he gets to the microphone. You're recognized, sir.
It will be after September 30th, and it'll probably be later in
October.
the fall.
Okay.
But we're actually having some follow-up efforts going on right now based on some activity that has occurred. So, only thing I probably can assure you is it'll be before the end of the calendar year. But we have a lot of other projects we're trying to get out and so forth, so we have to also give the city departments and the Big Bend CDC time to do some of the other stuff. So, but it's coming. It's on the plan.
Okay, I just want to make sure that regularly we hear from you and kind of put you on our agenda, because I personally value your audit reports, so
Appreciate
it's
it.
very helpful. Have you finalized your next year's?
No, we actually are starting that process now, and tomorrow's the first big day where we're going to have a off-site retreat to start putting that plan together. But that's a 2-month process, so.
October's going to be busy.
Yep.
I was in his office earlier today, and I can vouch for the fact that his desk is piled deep in paper, so. Thank you, sir. Does anyone else have anything for the next agenda? Mr. Grant?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair, and I may have missed it from the last meeting, but do we have any feedback from the City Commission yet?
No, sir. We are going to be on a future agenda within the next couple months. I understand that there are serious discussions going on with them. I have met with all but one of the group individually and gone over with them, our request concerning our jurisdiction was well received in every case. I believe that we are likely to have one or more champions for improving our jurisdiction. And now I fully expect also that they will, make it theirs, that it'll be their ordinance that they have to pass. So I fully expect to see their stamp on it as opposed to them just blanket adopting language that we may propose. But as we've talked about so many times, our jurisdiction is so narrow that pretty much anything will give us a little better ability to take some action.
And my understanding is that they're off during the month of August, I think, come back in September.
Yeah, and I did want to share this, that I believe the next commission meeting is September the 13th. So that's actually the Wednesday before our meeting, and I want to also make sure y'all notice that we're meeting on a Thursday, and it's from 5 to 8, because it was one of those meetings we had to switch around because of, I think, Blueprint. But we may have ethics mentioned on September the 13th. So I know I've urged board members to attend at least one city commission meeting. This city commission meeting may be one where you'd like to attend to see if this issue gets mentioned from the dais.
All right, Mr. Chair, I guess my only suggestion then is we may want to include updates from the City Commission on our agenda at some point.
I always
so
give
that,
those.
Yeah, so that we can know what that is and report it back out.
Right, and when I learn that the issue is going to be on the agenda, it would be my intent to go and be able to respond to any questions they may have, since we've given them both our March 2nd, 3rd memo was broader and more conceptual, and then our subsequent follow-up memo to them was much more specific and included draft language. Be there to defend that and defend anything that they might come up with that would be an expansion of jurisdiction. I don't think anything we've said to them was meant to be exclusive of any other good ideas. It was just things that seemed to rise to the top for us. So we will continue to try to press that process a little bit. Ms. Meadows-Keefe, I would also ask you if you could look at a change in our bylaws that would say that the ethics officer, not you, but any ethics officer we would have would not take, I'm not sure how to wordsmith this exactly. Unilateral or would not do anything final, not take any final action or make any final recommendation without the issue having come before the board or having been discussed with and approved by the chair or vice chair if it's a more minor issue, just so that there's, and I see this as much protection for the ethics officer as anything. It's clear that it is the board acting and never the ethics officer unilaterally. And if you would bring some language like that before us, I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Does anybody else have anything that they would like to add?
We're still talking about ideas.
Yes, sir.
And forgive me for getting forgetful. I'm getting a little older, but I know I mentioned one time in past meetings how I just still feel that a public letter from the Ethics Board to the citizens of Tallahassee would be helpful at times, that would be published in the newspaper. I would think the paper would publish it, where we could express our thoughts in a respectful way, in an educational way, and say, this is what we're about, this is what we've been doing, these are some hurdles we face, this is how we're trying to deal with it. We're trying to act with integrity and responsibility, but our own explanation of our own words in a responsible way. I still think that might be a helpful thing. So many times there's misinformation, and especially with a new body, but just throwing that idea out again.
All right. I will, Ms. Meadows-Keefe and I will volunteer to work on something. And we'll bring it at the next meeting. It'll be probably a rough draft, and you guys will, I'm sure, have lots of other things that you want to say or say more strongly or qualify a little bit, but we'll get that started. I think that's a great idea, and it might be something just like I was encouraged in meeting with individual city commissioners that that's something that whoever's chair ought to probably do once a year. This might be something that we would do. We do sort of an annual report to the city commission. This would be kind of our annual report almost to the citizens. Once a year, maybe letter if we can gin up enough interest in the media to publish it for us. And if not, I mean, we can always stick it on our website, but that's not like getting it in the paper.
So you could think about, if you wanted to do a My View, they usually attribute that to an individual author, so whether that would be under the chair's name, or you'd want it to be joint authorship with you and I. So just the mechanics of who's going to author it and whose name's going to be on it, and if that's going to be written on behalf of the whole board. Probably it would, right?
Yeah, I would, personally, I would want to see the board approve it, even though
Yep.
it goes under one name, just so that there's no confusion, and there's a sense of unanimity.
Right.
I'm going to announce that as you already have, our next meeting is September 21st. That's
No, 14th. Sorry, I think there was a mistake.
Oops, I'm looking at an old one, sorry. Let
14th.
me get this right.
Lucy caught it.
Our next meeting is September 14th, Thursday, here in the City Commission Chamber from 5 to 8. I expect that we will have some issues to discuss that will be substantive. I would, at this point, I'm going to take public comment on any non-agenda items, and then we're going to go into a quick break, and then from there we'll go into executive session, and then we will come back here after our shade meeting. Mr. Wilcox, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and board members. Just a couple of quick thoughts. Cecil, board member Davis, I think that's a great idea to have a letter that goes out to the public, and because after all, that's who you report to, and so I think that would be great. The other thing, when you're considering those 4 avenues for referral of complaints, I've heard a couple of times mentioned that you might send it to one of those 4 sources, and I would just urge you to send it to, if you decide to go that route, send it to all 4 and leave it up to them. I mean, because they're each different offices, and I think the intent of the legislature when they put that into law was to, give those 4 different sources the opportunity to review these complaints and see if they had merit, to send to the Florida Commission on Ethics.
Okay, good advice. Any other comments or questions? If not, we're going to take a break. We will then go directly into our shade meeting. We will come back here simply to adjourn the meeting, but I don't think there's any great need for anyone to sit around and wait for us to do our thing. So with that, we are in recess, and we'll be back in, I don't know, an hour and a half.
Did y'all get the voting tickets to her? Yes. Okay. Let's see if I heard from Mr. Smith.
see the clock from here.
It's almost, it's a little after 7.
7:02.
It's a couple minutes after 7. We just finished our shade meeting. We considered 2 complaints. The first one against, related to the TAP program involving Commissioner Miller. We have closed that complaint. And the second one involving the city manager and a possible gift, we are forwarding on to the Florida Commission on Ethics, along with the attachments that we received with that complaint. And with that, we are done. I will see you guys in a month.
Hope the first week of school goes well for your son.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
I remember when we were getting off our children.
First week is